Hi everyone. So we're gonna pick up right where we left off last time, and here is where we left off. You were supposed to review your homework. Hopefully you all have a good understanding of all of this, so I am gonna go ahead and move on. Okay, before we move on, there is a reading in here that I would love for you guys to read, actually take a look at, because it's going to show you the different points of views on imperialism, right? Colonizing from the perspective of Americans versus the natives, and we're going to focus on the Philippines. So the readings are two different point of views, obviously. One is an interview with President McKinley. He's going to talk about why he thought it was necessary to imperialize the Philippines, or I don't even think he called it imperialism. But anyway, take a look at it. And then the other one is Emilio Aguinaldo. He was the leader here during this time. Not here, sorry, in the Philippines. So he has a very different point of view, obviously, as to why America got involved in the Philippines. So take a look at those. There are some questions in the reading document that you might want to answer to know that you are understanding this. So this should take you about, I don't know, 7-8 minutes. When you're done reading, you can come back and we can start with the legal issues here. Okay, so after the Spanish-American War, we have new territories that we kind of have to worry about, right? So we're going to take a look at Cuba and what the issue is there when it comes to legal issues. So the Teller Amendment was passed in 1898, and this one was a joint resolution of U.S. Congress enacted on April 20th, 1898 in response to President McKinley's war message. And basically it's going to place a condition on the United States military presence in Cuba. The Platt Amendment of 1901 is a little bit different. This one we are going to focus on the ties between Cuba and the U.S. So although Cuba gained independence from Spain, they're not completely rid of the U.S. You know, the U.S. still wants a lot of say in Cuba, and they make it seem like it's for Cuba's own good, okay? So here are the things that the Platt Amendment basically said. One, the U.S. had to approve all Cuban treaties to make sure that Cuba was doing the right thing. Cuba could not hold debt. The U.S. could send troops to restore order in Cuba if needed, and Cubans promised to sell U.S. coal and lease naval stations. Okay, so why would the U.S. be afraid to let Cuba kind of be on their own? Why did they feel the need to keep a tie with Cuba, I should say? Remember, there's a European competitor that is also trying to get all the land, imperialized land. Remember we talked about Germany? Well, yes, I think the U.S. had a bit of fear that if they let Cuba kind of do their own thing, then Germany might come and try to grasp it. So this is part of the reason why the U.S. passes the Platt Amendment. Now, we have another point here. I guess I should mention Cubans are forced to write this amendment into their constitution after the Spanish-American War. So the Cubans agreed to do this. Now, insular cases, these have to do with how the people are going to be ruled, or the status of the people in these islands. So these are a series of U.S. Supreme Court rulings on the legal status and rights of the people in the Philippines, Puerto Rico, under U.S. territorial rule. So, right, because now technically, do we consider people in Puerto Rico citizens? Do we give them all the rights that the U.S. citizens have? So these are the questions all came into play. So they decided that fundamental constitutional rights will apply to people in these territories, but other constitutional rights are not going to apply in these territories. Okay, fundamental rights are basically the Bill of Rights. So that's the only thing that applied to people in these territories. Other constitutional rights do not. So just to make it easier for you guys, could they vote in Puerto Rico or in the Philippines, no, absolutely not. But any of the other first 10 amendments, that was all good, I guess. I don't know. Okay, so let's talk about what is going on at home during this time of imperialism, because we are going to start to see the beginning of the US Japanese strained relationship here, which is going to play all the way into World War II. So in 1906, after the Russo-Japanese War, we are going to see a lot of Japanese people immigrate to the US after the displacement. You don't need to know the whole cause of the war or anything like that. That's more of a world core thing. But the one thing that you should know is that the war concluded with the Treaty of Portsmouth that was mediated by Roosevelt. And what ends up happening here is Roosevelt was trying to kind of play fair on both sides. They did not want to upset the Russians or the Japanese too much, even though the Japanese thought that for sure they were going to take, that Teddy was going to mediate this treaty more with the Japanese side. So anyway, maybe that's kind of where the strained relationship sort of starts. But going back to immigrants, so Japanese immigrants are going to be coming to the U.S. during this time. A lot of them end up in the West Coast, particularly California. In California, there is going to be a huge nativist response to this. They're going to cite Japanese as a yellow peril, not happy at all. And this is usually a typical nativist response, as you guys know now, right? So anytime you see a big group of influx of immigrants to an area, it's always like, oh, they're trying to take our jobs, so on and so forth. So that's essentially what ends up happening. Let's see what else. Let's keep going. During this time, there's also another big thing that ends up happening. In 1906, there is a big earthquake in San Francisco. Now, we already know how people react when there's fear, right? So not only are they starting to see a lot of Japanese immigrants, they're like, oh no, now we had a big earthquake. This earthquake was pretty devastating to San Francisco. The earthquake was a pretty big one, 7.8. It destroys about 80% of the city. A lot of people dead. A lot of fires spark after that. It's going to destroy a lot of the buildings. So one of the things that happens is that there are not enough buildings for schools. I couldn't think of the word. So in response to not only the earthquake, but to the big influx of Japanese immigrants, the San Francisco School Board is going to say that Asian children cannot attend public schools. They must be taught in a racially segregated area, in racially segregated schools. Now, this did not just apply to Japanese. It also applied to Chinese and Koreans too. Why did they want to do that? Because they wanted more space for the white children, the better space for the white children. Well, this is going to make actually international news, and the people of Japan are already pretty sensitive, because of the way the treaty after the Japanese-Russo War turned out. So this is even going to be a bigger issue. Japanese are very furious over this, calling it racism. So Teddy Roosevelt is going to have to intervene, because there's no way that he wants, to go to war or anything like that, or continue heightening the tension here. So Teddy Roosevelt invites the school board to the White House and forces them to repeal their decision, saying you can't do that. Don't segregate the Asian students from the white schools. He does this, though, after the gentleman's agreement. This was an informal agreement between the U.S. and Japan. In order to kind of make Japanese people happy, this is when Teddy talked to the school district, but also to make people, the natives, happy back at home, the U.S. made Japan promise that they would curb the flow of Japanese immigrants coming to the U.S. So they didn't actually pass something like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, but they did curb the immigration numbers. You did see less Japanese immigrants coming to the U.S. after that. Okay. Well, Teddy did not want to be seen as weak after all of these negotiations between Japan and him, right? These treaties. So he's like, all right, let's still show everyone that the U.S. is still the superpower. So fear that Japan saw the U.S. as weak, Roosevelt is going to send the Great White Fleet on tour of the world in 1907. Literally, this was just us showing off our fleet around the world, letting everyone know that we have the best fleet. Then you have the Root Takahira Agreement between the U.S. and Japan. So Roosevelt does want to improve relations with Japan, right? Because he realizes we just need to keep tensions low right now. Also, think about the Philippines. They just acquired territorial gains in the Philippines. Japan is very close to the Philippines. So they don't want Japan to stand in the way of them or Japan to do anything with the Philippines. So they're like, we have to kind of make an agreement, right? We have to negotiate some stuff here. So this this agreement, the Root Takahira Agreement, is just basically both countries pledging to respect each other's territorial possessions. And they are also going to recognize China's independence and territorial integrity and support for the continuation of the open door policy. Right. You have some review and discussion here that you should look at to kind of review this whole imperialism PowerPoint. And then the last thing here is this political cartoon. Think about it. We're going to open class on Monday with this one. So this has to do with the big stick diplomacy. Carry a big stick is basically what Teddy believed in. So what is the intended reaction of the cartoon? How does this cartoon use symbolism? And what political message does this cartoon send? All right, that is it for imperialism. So hopefully you guys got a good understanding of this. We are going to then be taking the short response, and that's it. You don't have any homework this weekend, so have a good one.